Hey everyone, Michael Alm here. This week I'm working on a cabinet that I'm trying to faux finish to look like steel, specifically blackened steel. And the technique is something that I came up with. I've worked in the museum business for a long time, and I've learned a bunch of different stains and techniques. And this is one that I came up with that works really well, especially on a plywood called MDO. This stuff is a construction grade plywood and it has a resin paper on the surface of it. I like to use it a lot for painting. You can sand the surface, make it really nice and smooth. You can leave kind of the grainy texture of the paper. It's great stuff. It's a little bit on the pricey side, so I don't use it for everything. I've also got a technique to do on regular Baltic birch plywood. This is a little bit different of a process, but they're both pretty simple and straightforward. So I hope you'll stick around and see how they're done. So I'm gonna start with the plywood technique, and this is just regular Baltic birch plywood. I have not sanded this yet, and I'm just gonna apply a coat of shellac. This is a sealer coat. The idea behind this will prevent the grain from coming through. So if you were just to go straight into putting the stain on this, it would look like wood, which is what we're trying to avoid. So I'm gonna put a nice coat of the shellac on, nice and even. It doesn't need to be a heavy coat, but you do want to make sure it's nice and even. And then I will sand it back with the power sander. Then we can move on to the stain. So we got 220 grit sandpaper on the power sander, and I just want to get a nice light smooth finish. I'm not going to sand too deep. I don't want to remove the shellac. I'm just letting the shellac sit underneath the surface. The next step in this process is to fill in the pores of the wood, and I'm going to use some Timbermate black for that and a putty knife, and I'm going to go across the grain. So I've sanded all these to 320 and they're looking really good. You'll notice that I've left it pretty mottled looking, and that kind of gives it that mill scale look. And then on top of that, I'm gonna apply India ink. You wanna make sure if you buy this from an art supply store that you get India ink and not Sumi ink. Sumi ink will lift with water, India ink will not. This is waterproof, and you can use this to stain pieces of furniture. I would still put a top coat over it, and we will put a top coat over this, but it's really good stuff. I'll put links to all the materials that I'm using in the description down below. Happy little accident right there. Some of the ink dripped on here and ran down there. Looks like an oil stain. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so that's it for the plywood. It's a pretty simple process. It's a little finicky, but not too bad really. And you could kind of make it look however you want. You could really build up layers of the wood filler and kind of create mill scale on it if you wanted to go that far. I kind of like a more subtle approach. So once I get the clear coat on this, it'll kind of even everything out and look really good. So the next step is to move on to the MDO. The MDO is significantly easier. It is just a process of sanding this surface. I don't have to use the wood filler. I don't have to use the shellac. And then I can just skip straight to the ink and it looks great. This will require a few more coats than this because it will not absorb very well into the paper surface. So anyway, I'll go over and sand. I'm gonna sand to 220 grit and then we're ready to go. we go. I let this stuff dry up really nicely. I have assembled the drawer box now, and I will say I'm pretty happy with this. It's the tone is definitely better on the MDO than it is on the plywood. It just looks a lot more like steel. But the plywood surrogate's pretty good. I think it's going to be convincing enough for what I'm doing. But definitely, like, the MDO, it sells. I think this is really steel-like. So I'm gonna now put a top coat on it. I'm gonna use Armor Seal satin. You can kind of put whatever top coat you want on this. You could just wax it so it looks a little bit more like steel. I want a little bit hardier of a finish, so I'm gonna use satin polyurethane. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. This is kind of a part 2 of this build. So if you haven't seen the build of the melting table, go check that out as well. I'll leave a link over here. And yeah, if you had any questions about that process, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm always happy to answer those. So real quick, I wanted to thank everyone who's joined me on Patreon. I just launched it a little over a week ago, and it's doing great. I really appreciate the support over there. If you want to see me make more content like this, please let me know, and Patreon's a great way to support that. So really appreciate it, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.